Okay, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are on the globe. Welcome everybody to this webinar organized by Digital Memory Studies Association. I'm Valentina Salvi, member of Núcleo de Estudios sobre Memoria of IDES, Argentina. I'm very glad to be here to moderate this panel. Today, we are going to discuss a very actual and crucial issue. Memory and radical right wing. And precisely of its actuality, this is a subject deserves not only a deep academic reflection, but also new researches as the ones that we are going to share the day of today. Memory and polarization, navigating the narrative of the radical right wing in Chile and Colombia, is the issue that reunites us today. Focusing on Colombia and Chile, the discuss will explore how far-right discourses on social media in Chile and among the elite in Colombia challenge traditional justice and contribute to the renaissance of salvationist memories of recent histories. To begin, I would like to introduce you our speakers. Carolina Aguilera is Assistant Researcher at the Center of Studies of Conflict and Cohesion Line, COES. She has specialized in human rights and memory studies about the political violence and recent past in Chile and Latin America. Manuela Badilla is Assistant Professor at the School of Psychology of the Pontificia Universidad Católica of Chile and Assistant Researcher at the Center of Studies of Conflict and Cohesion Line, COES. Her main lines of study is the relationship between social mobilization, collective memory, and temporality in the activation of conflicts. Daniela Jara is Associate Professor at Universidad of Valparaíso and currently Director of the School of Sociology. Her research interests are social memory studies, cultural studies, transitional justice, sociological theory, and human rights. Nicolas Villarroel is psychologist and PhD at the Australian National University. His doctoral research focused on how emotion shapes the memory of the dictatorship among Chilean exiles in Australia. They together will present their work about Chile. And then Rike Grunau is coordinator of the German-Colombian program Conflict, Memory, and Peace at the Catholic University of Eichstätt and Ingolstadt. She holds a doctorate from the University of Constance and studied anthropology and Latin America study in Berlin, Bogota, Zurich, and Bern. She will present her work on Colombia. Welcome, and it is a pleasure to see you today. Until we start, I would like to thank to MSI's Memory Study Association for organizing this event, and especially to Katarzyna and Sergey for bringing the support today. Now I would like to tell you the dynamic of the webinar. First, Carolina and then Rilke will present their papers on Chile and Colombia. And then Manuela, Daniela, Nicolas, and I will formulate some questions in order to provoke the change. I will expect that you in the public, in the audience, can contribute with some question to activate and to produce an interest exchange between us. So, dear colleagues, who like to start? Carolina? Okay. You have 20 minutes, okay?
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for being here today. I will share a presentation. Completa. So, I will present an ongoing research project. We are working with Manuela, Daniela, Nicolas, and which is part of a broader project funded by COES, the Center for Social Conflict and Cohesion in Chile, with other colleagues. I would like to mention Carla Del Sante, Michelle Haffeman, Matias Gómez, Cristóbal Rovira, Gabriel Otero, and Camila Houstra. We are looking at how far-right actors in Chile leverage social media to advance disruptive narratives about Pinochet dictatorship and appropriate the language of human rights. As you probably know, in Chile, this is a discourse originally rooted in the opposition to the authoritarian regime of Pinochet. The rise of far-right in Chile is part of this global fourth wave of far-right movements. And as Casmure has proposed, and its increasing influence in Latin America, as Cristóbal Rovira and Lee Payne have studied. The main difference with previous waves is that now their discourses are being normalized and these groups are becoming demarginalized. And social media has played a key role in this process. So regarding the concept of far-right, we follow the conceptualization of Casmude, who uses it as an umbrella concept to name the broad and diverse groups that distinguish themselves from the traditional right by being hostile to liberal democracy. Far-right groups have different forms of organizations as political parties, social movements, think tanks, among others, and use diverse social practices to promote and mobilize their ideas, manifestations, media campaigns, communication, and of course, electoral participation. In recent decades, it has been acknowledged that the internet has helped those groups to promote their ideas, reach new adherents, and bypass traditional media where they might have less press. Far-right digital memory has been only recently researched using various analytical perspectives like social movement studies, cultural studies, new media, and memory studies, stressing either the digital activation and framing processes of movements or memory activism to refer to the struggle and mobilization of certain narratives and representations, or focusing on the representations and narratives that circulate in those digital media. In general, studies about the use of social media for activism have demonstrated how digital platforms are a key resource for their actions, enabling escalation and mass mobilization, strengthening internal organization, supporting the formation of collective identities, and creating arenas for both internal deliberation and external engagement. These virtual communities disseminate traditional far-right positions such as xenophobia and misogyny, using symbols designed to attract younger audiences. Early research on social media emphasized the role of platform algorithms in creating echo chambers and ideological bubbles, increasing the likelihood that users will be exposed only to like-minded content. However, more recent studies have challenged this view, showing that online consumption is in fact diverse and no more segregated than offline consumption. In Latin America, radical right-wing actors have emerged and achieved electoral success, as the case of Argentina and Brazil, of course. This new wave in the region appears to be aligned with the European radical right populist currents which have emerged in reaction to the advance of progressivism and multiculturalism through the formulation of ultra-conservative parties and movements aimed at confronting and reversing such progress. So, what are we doing in our research? We have qualitatively analyzed publications and interactions on Instagram of far-right accounts. Instagram is the third most widely used social network in Chile and currently allows also for an open search and downloading publications. This is why we are using this platform. We built a purposive sample, selecting accounts that produce far-right content, particularly concerning issues related to human rights, accounts that have more than 10,000 followers. We began with well-known accounts and grew the sample with a snowball sample logic. This process led us to 109 accounts, and we collected posts between October 2019 and October 2024, considering the social uprising of 2019 in Chile that resulted in the organization of ultra-conservative groups and online and offline mobilization. So we ended up with 507 posts. So what are our results? We conducted a thematic analysis to identify the main discursive dimension and also a critical discourse analysis of a sample of these posts to explore those discourse strategies about human rights. So this critical discourse analysis reveals three main trends in how far-right activists discuss human rights, which point to a broader strategy aimed first at questioning and then reappropriating human rights discourse. So following Norris and Engelhardt, this question can be understood as a cultural backlash, a reaction against the moral universalism of human rights. So the first trend is framing human rights as a privilege of the left. The analysis illustrates that human rights are portrayed as a field that has been lost and captured by the global left, rendering them ideologized and reserved only for this sector. It is argued that human rights are politicized and biased in favor of progressive organizations and actors, and that institutions such as the National Institute of Human Rights, Instituto Nacional de Derechos Humanos, the state body responsible for safeguarding human rights in Chile, is not impartial. So there we have in Spanish the original post by a parliamentarian called Maria Luisa Cordero, stated, I reject that human rights are restricted police from doing their job and are an issue only for the left. In a similar tone, the former and also current presidential candidate, Jose Antonio Cast, posted that the Republican Party aimed to refund the INDH so it could truly fulfill its function. He also stated, human rights are universal. We want to refund the INDH so that it respects and watches over each one of us. So notably, while invoking the principle of universality, he simultaneously claims that human rights currently protect only some individuals, hence his proposal to reform the INDH so it can safeguard each of us. This post reflects a broader discursive trend that human rights and the institutions responsible for upholding them fail to protect everybody, and that there are other victims of human rights violation who remain unrecognized. Far-right actors argue that human rights should, for instance, defend individual property rights, even if this comes at expense of collective rights associated with historically marginalized struggles, for instance, feminist, LGTB, or indigenous rights. Importantly, the call to reform the INDH can be interpreted as part of a wider questioning of post-dictatorship transitional justice measures, since the INDH represents a cornerstone of Chile's transitional justice approach. Its foundational aim is to foster a culture of respect for human rights in response to the violation committed during Pinochet regime. This is the transitional justice perspective. So a second trend is exposing ideological persecution. Alongside the far-right demand for the universality of human rights and the denunciation of the perceived partiality that excludes those who are not left-wing, the critical discourse analysis shows that these groups simultaneously claim that they themselves are victims of human rights discourse. Their publications and interaction aim to expose what they frame as ideological persecution and violation of their own human rights. For instance, in the context of the 2019 social uprising, during which police came under scrutiny for human rights violation and instances of police brutality, as was reported even by the UN, various far-right politicians and social media influencers stepped in the defending law enforcement, effectively inverting the direction of the alleged abuses. One of the most emblematic cases used by the far right to sustain their narrative of ideological persecution is that of police officer Sebastián Zamora, who pushed a protester off a bridge during a demonstration. Zamora was dismissed from the police force after being found guilty of attempted, though frustrated, homicide. This case has been framed by the far right as an instance of ideological persecution, arguing that the protester was engaged in criminal and disruptive behavior, while Zamora was merely fulfilling his professional duty. In this context, also parliamentarian Chiara Marchesi from the Republican Party posted the following: Zamora has been unjustly persecuted by Fiscal Chong and the ideological left. How nice that today we have recognized him with a tremendous applause in the Chamber of Deputies to share all our affection. Interestingly, Marchesi accuses both a judge, the prosecutor Chong, and the ideological left of persecuting Zamora, resonating with a broader far-right discourse that portrays the left as deceptive, a theme also found in historical narratives, for instance, Pinochet's reference to the fallacies of communism. Other posts echo similar sentiments, demonstrating how the far-right positions the police or the armed forces as victims of ideological persecution. In doing so, they recast the discourse of human rights as a battleground for ideological struggle, thereby undermining its universalist foundations. The discourse strategy has another consequence. It aims to criminalize the right to legitimate protest by portraying the police as victims. Protesters are represented without distinction as violent and destructive actors. This is illustrated by this post by a far-right media that says the ultra-left pushed the idea that October 18, 2019 was a social and civic mobilization. They also spread the thesis that human rights violations were committed by carabineros. And today, they do not take any responsibility for the lies they spread to legitimize their narrative. And then we have a third discursive trend revealed by the analysis where human rights is used as a tool to denounce leftist governments such as Cuba and Venezuela. As one post states, also a parliamentarian, he says, no matter how much they censorship, we will not be silenced about the murders and human rights violations committed by Maduro's narco dictatorship. This strategy seeks to represent the right wing as united in opposition to the perceived communist threat and employs specific lexical choices such as dictatorship and totalitarianism to characterize leftist governments abroad and by extension to frame the government of Salvador Allende, the previous government of to Pinochet, in similar terms. This is also exemplified in a post from the Chilean Libertarian Party's account, quoting far-right influencer Axel Kaiser, where he says, September 11, 1973, on that day, the Chilean armed forces, summoned by Congress and aligned with the popular will, ended the communist dictatorship of Salvador Allende and opened the way for the country's democratic and socio-economic recovery. This is the real history of that day. The rest is propaganda from the same people who wanted to turn Chile into a second Cuba. These publications illustrate how the far right appropriates the discourse of human rights to reinterpret Allende's government as a dictatorship, thereby legitimizing the memory of the coup d'etat as an act of salvation from a communist threat. Moreover, the same discursive operation delegitimized narratives that frame the coup and Pinochet's dictatorship as an authoritarian regime responsible for human rights violation. In this sense, post-dictatorship discourses centered on human rights are referred as communist propaganda. What emerges is a far-right discourse that positions Allende and the political left as totalitarian and as the true perpetrators of human rights abuses. Within this framing of the past, Pinochet and the military are constructed as saviors who enabled the return for democracy in the country. So to finish my presentation, I would like to put a question. So, are we facing a misappropriation of human rights language, or this is part of a process, an ongoing process of broadening a concept in a field always open to contestation? One of the trends we now I just presented show something that is paradoxical. These groups have long time resisted the universalist discourse of rights, but now deploy them to promote exclusionary and hierarchical agendas. So drawing on concepts like norms spoiling by Sanders or frame jacking by Valentina Salvi and Le Pen, or the concept of right against rights, we see that these actors are using legal mobilization, revisionist historiography, and conservative institutional frameworks to challenge emancipatory interpretation of human rights. Revisionist narratives of past atrocity are not new in the Southern Cone. However, this resurgence today aligns with a broader transnational phenomena, the strategic misappropriation of human rights discourse by radical wing movements. This is a process that is observed since 2016, where scholars have noted how conservative actors have adopted the language of human rights to reverse prior gains, prioritize selective rights such as family or religious rights, and exclude vulnerable groups such as migrants, LGBTQ+ people, or indigenous. As Valentina Salvi has argued, even in Argentina, some groups defend imprisoned criminals, arguing for the human rights of those perpetrators of crimes against humanity. Authors such as Burka and Jung identify the shift as part of a global backlash, wherein human rights are redefined from within, elevating certain claims while delegitimizing others. So examples include a U.S. commission in the first government of Trump to analyze human rights, and also the some groups at the UN level as the Alliance Defending Freedom. So is it possible to think that what we observe is not simply the instrumental use of rights language, but the open and contested nature of human rights themselves? So while some see this as a crisis, others, like Kate Nash, highlight that human rights have always involved cultural, political, and legal struggles over meaning. Thus, this is the question we would like to put today to finish. Are we facing the fragility of a concept or the resilience of these human rights as a contested political field? So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Carolina, for such amazing presentation. Now we are going to hear Rike Bruno. Yeah? Okay.
Yes, thank you. I am going to share my presentation as well. And while I do so, surprise, it's now not working. Okay, fine. I use the opportunity to first say thank you to all the wonderful colleagues who have agreed to be here today, and also to Katarzyna for being our technical support of this session. I'm afraid I might be needing you. And also
do you want me to share your presentation with my screen and you will just tell me?
I might just. I think it might just be working. Okay. No, it's asking me for privacy settings, and those are enabled. So I think I do need to ask you to please share the presentation. I'm sorry. Yeah, so, but I was going to thank all of you for attending also. Thank you so much. So, exactly.
Can you all see the presentation? Yeah, is it visible? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so, I think we are ready.
Great, thank you. I think we can, yeah, so I'm going to present now basically my book called Intersections of Affect, Memory, and Privilege in Bogota, Colombia. It came out just a few months ago, so it's hot off the press. And I'd be happy for a lot of people to read it, of course. But just to give you an idea of what's in it, I am going to use this opportunity to talk a little bit more about it. I think we can go to the next slide, and then I will tell you about the guiding questions of the book. Katarzyna, can you advance 1 or 2 slides? Katarzyna, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. You need to tell me which one. Can you see?
I think we're going for the third now.
Right. So once more, 1, 2, 3. This one?
I don't see it moving. Does anyone else?
Oh, okay. Just give me a second. Sorry for that. Once more. Now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you. So the guiding questions.
This one.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, okay.
So guiding questions of the book. So the big question really, it all started out for me with the question of what it means to be affected by conflict. So it's not exactly a question about the right or the radical right, but we'll get there eventually. This investigation really started out by a bigger question of me being curious about coming to Colombia, seeing as it was that even though everybody told me not to do certain things, not to go somewhere at specific times, to specific places, take care wherever I go, whenever I go, it was still quite possible to survive this, even not even, but as the person I am. And I came to wonder about the circumstances of this, of those two very different perceptions of Colombia being a country in conflict and it being perfectly possible to lead a life apparently unaffected by it. And so this led me to the questions of where and how experiences of conflict come into being. In this particular case for Bogota's upper middle class, because that's the people I moved among. And as an anthropologist, I chose my population kind of specifically in that area as the kind of people who are not usually the center of ethnographic attention. And from there, I started to also wonder how specific social positions, and in this case, positions of privilege, influence experiences and therefore also memories of the Colombian conflict. And we can now go to the next slide, please.
Did the slide changed?
Not for me.
Oh my God. Okay, let's try again. No worries. Can you see the right slide now?
It's still the old one.
All right. I will stop sharing and share again.
It should be the one with the green picture.
Yeah, I don't know what is. Just give me a second. I will try to. This one. Slideshow. Is this one? Can you see the right one?
No, it should be the next one, the one after this.
Then this one?
Not yet.
I still don't see it changing.
Okay. One again. Okay, can you see the slides now?
Yes, perfect.
Is this the one?
Yes.
All right.
So this slide really is to situate the book in within broader discourses. Central concepts I work with in this book are affect and oppression, as defined by Sarah Ahmed, and the concept of the implicated subject, as defined by Michael Rothberg. These two categories help me to, on the one hand side, investigate what it means to feel a conflict, to feel the past, feel a memory, and on the other hand, helps me position my interlocutors in a specific position that is neither a bystander, nor a perpetrator, nor a victim, but somehow partly an intersection of at times several of these categories, at other times not an intersection, but always a position in which one's privileges do influence one's experiences, one's memories, and but also one's implication in broader societal dynamics, which is really the aspect that interested me most. I am using emic categories to describe affect, so I'm not working with the notion of fear or anger or I don't know, sadness maybe, but I use the affects that really came up within my data, and those were, in this particular case, 4 specific ones, which do not aim to be, do not aim to portray a full picture of all the possible affects, but to outline those that I found were most common in my interactions, which are arraigo, dolor de patria, empatía, and paz. And I will come to those for just now when we're talking about the contents of the book. Theoretically, I think the work is situated in third wave Western memory studies because it treats aspects or topics of intersectionality. It works with feminist theories, and it tries to develop the connections between memory and class a little more in detail. And it is also embedded within a tradition of ethnographic writing, post-writing culture debate. So it is written from a very personal point of view. It is also very reflexive about my own position within those constellations, and also treats myself as an implicated subject within the dynamics of affective encounters in interviews, for example. And why I think why we're here, the book can, I think, contribute to discussions about affect politics and the new right, which does not mean that all of my interlocutors can be located as right or far right, but I do think some of their emotional tendencies do speak to the discussions we have just heard Carolina develop. So next, 2 slides more, please. Again, a green picture. Yes, perfect. So the first chapter is called Arraigo, and it treats the effective connection to land. It circles around the narrative of not being able to go to the finca, which is quite a central memory for Bogota's upper middle class when thinking about their connections to the conflict. And when one first hears that, I often, when I tell this to people, usually the first reaction is, oh no, the poor guys couldn't go to their finca, which is to a degree understandable if you compare this experience to displacement, to extortions, to kidnapping, to killings, to massacres, because then, of course, it doesn't quite, it's just not the same comparing this kind of experience to what others lived through. But nevertheless, I think it's worthwhile to question what that actually means. And the meaning of not being able to go to the finca has a lot to do with questions of belonging and with questions of distinction. So what for the upper middle class is arraigo, the enjoyment of finca vacation, a nice holiday weekend getaway, sometimes is also connected to the desarraigo of others. So for example, displacement, as some regions that are now becoming rather touristy have a history of displacement of the local population, for example. So the vacations of some are very, very interconnected to some of the like most prominent and most urgent aspects of the Colombian conflict in general, which has a lot to do with who owns the land. Next slide, please. The second chapter is called Dolor de Patria. I have kind of tried to translate that as a hurting fatherland, or as a fatherland that hurts, but knowing full well that patria is actually a motherland. But the point of Dolor de Patria really is the temporal dimension of being affected by conflict, and which is re-invoked, for example, in political events that trigger memories of past disappointments. So it's expressed very often in the idea of nothing ever changes, as in, for example, when there's a newspaper news about a corrupt politician, the story is, oh, again, now we have this corrupt politician, then we have that corrupt politician, so nothing ever changes. They're all corrupt. Nothing. There's no perspective of a different future. This will never change because that's just how Colombia is. And that experience is also triggered by the many experiences of peace negotiations, for example, which Colombia has a lot of experience with, and technically also could know how to manage their expectations. Yet nevertheless, every disappointment is taken as proof for this is not working. This will never work. This always stays the same. So this is a little the story of Dolor de Patria. Next slide, please. The third chapter on empatia is the one I think is probably best connected to today's topic, or which for me has the strongest points of connection to a debate about the new right, the far right, the radical right, because it centers about ideas of empathy, and of whom to connect with, and I tell this story around the idea of we're all victims of the conflict, and as Valentina, for example, has shown in one of her works, very often when we're all victims of the conflict, then no one's responsible. And what I'm trying to show in this chapter is that there is very specific situations in which people like to be responsible, and this responsibility is very much tied to mechanisms of distinction. So when empathy is something I can give as something that will make me look good, people are more willing to actually extend this to others, but not if there's nothing to gain from this, so to say. So it's very much centered on the social dimension of being affected by conflict, and the question of for whom to extend the social connection, so to say, because empathy with others and with an other, as for example an ex guerrilla member, contains the possibility of destabilizing one's own place in the world, and the last thing the upper middle class wants is to see their own place destabilized, when really a constant feeling of, or a constant fear of falling is what describes their position somewhere between the elite and the middle or lower middle class. And I might be able to go into that example on this photo later on, but for now, we're going to the last slide so that I can wrap this up and we have more time to discuss. Yes, thank you. So the last chapter is called Paz, and is also meant as a conclusion. In the chapter, I try to answer the question what peace feels like, and I describe paz as a socially stratified affect, connecting the experiences of arraigo, dolor de patria, and empatia as some of the obstacles to peace. As in, when the upper middle class imagines peace through arraigo, they imagine a finca vacation. They imagine the calm of using their privilege, really. When they imagine peace through dolor de patria, they're not really imagining it through dolor de patria, but as an absence of that. So the idea of not having to suffer because nothing ever changes is somehow contained in dolor de patria as a vision for a different future, but it's never really considered an actual possibility. And the notion of paz within empatia is, of course, the idea of a different connection, of the construction of a different connection, or the construction of a a vínculo, we would say in Spanish, but I think connection is fine, but it's not the same. Yeah, and so tying all these knots together really at the end stands the realization that unfortunately for the upper middle class, peace or paz is very much a privilege that not everybody deserves, or not everybody deserves equally, and that leads to the realization that the upper middle class really is not as those kinds of people who for quite a few years have the ability to live in relative peace. There is no need to engage in furthering this experience and to extend it to the others, particularly to those others who are not considered morally equal. And so this, I think, shows that they're not very likely to become actors for peace. And that is the sad end of the story. For now, who knows? Yeah, and with that, I think I end my presentation. Thank you very much, and I look forward to discussing now.
Thanks, Rike, for your presentation. Very interesting. So we can start a moment of exchange, making some question. If you want, the audience out there, please, if you want, write some question that we can share together. And meanwhile, I can start with a point that's for me very interesting. I mean, the two presentations are amazing. I want to say a lot of things, but I want to focus on one topic that's for me is very important. And first, I will start with the case of Chile, and then to ask a question for Rike. So for the Chilean colleagues first, the case you presented is centered around the dispute over the meaning of human rights, which is crucial. I mean, it's crucial. Why in the middle of the river with this question now, with the advance of the far right. No, the same goes for Milei's radical right in Argentina. I mean, in Brazil with Bolsonaro is the same. And of course, it's in relation with the weight that the human rights discourse has in our societies. It's a point, a very important point. So the cultural battle goes directly to this point. So there is nowadays a discussion if memory is important for far right. I mean, the people who investigate far right they don't are interested in this point, but we that are working on memory, we have to put in a first position this discussion about the relation between cultural battle and the problem of memory in our society. I mean, in the Southern societies. So this is my point of view. So I mean, this goes, as I have said, the same goes for Milei's radical right, and for years now, the relatives of convicted perpetrators have been arguing against the concept of human right to get rid or to reduce their sentences. So the actuality of this point is not now, but has his own history. Now, the question is, can the right wing be successful of that? What would happen if they managed to put the whole human rights narrative of their service? The radical right claims to convert its particular, based and ideological position, like any other political discourse, into a universal position that allows Chilean or Argentine society to reflect and recognize itself in it. I think that this is what is at stake. And the other point is the centrality of the category of victim, still centrality in our societies. And the point is, who are the victims? Victim of who? So the right has his own discourse about that, no? A model of victim that the Argentine or Chilean or Brazilian society have reflect itself in it or feel empathy, as Rike told us. So about these 2 points, no, about the fights on human rights, or about the figure of victim, and the relation with social media. This is the other point that you talk about. So my point is, what is the limits of the regularity response to this? This is other question. Is regulating the circulation of the discourse of social media a sufficient response? I think that our research, or the research you have just shown, gives complex and multidimensional insight to seek the dispute in a political level instead of the regulatory one. So I want to hear about this dispute. I mean, because the political answer would be put on the question of regulating the discourse, but not in the political one, which is the social sense of victim and the social sense of human rights. So this is a question for the colleagues from Chile. And to Rike, I have a methodological question. You are an anthropologist, so this is a very interesting point for you and for me too. And when I heard you, I asked myself, how did you resolve the tension between tests? I think the voice of your interviewers and the context, the conflict, the armed conflict in Colombia, in your research. What do I mean by this? I mean, the tension between the voice of your interviewers replicated a war that disengaged them from the armed forces in one sense. But your theoretical guns brings in the notion of implicated subject, replace this subject in a relative position with a larger context. And this is a very methodological and conceptual decision. So it seems to me fundamental to introduce the voice of the subjects we are studying in a wider context in order not to fall into a naive perspectivism. So I think is a problem that probably you have to manage in your research. Then I want to ask you a question, a general question for the two cases. What do you feel doing social sciences in this polarized, cruel context that we are working now? I want to hear you some or other idea about your personal or collective as a group, or personal as Rike experience in doing social sciences in this stress context. Yeah. Meanwhile, you are start answer. Perhaps the audience outside want to formulate some questions and then we can read them and share with the colleagues. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Valentina. Your questions are very difficult to answer. We have also a question by Lena Voigtländer. So, as I understand your question, it's what to do with this counter battle led by the far right in the political dimension. It's not easy to answer, and I believe that if there is an option, I think this is the option taken by organizations of human rights, which is to denounce that the use of human rights by those groups, it's unfair. It's not true to the original idea of human rights that comes from the Nazism. So human rights is directly linked to these crimes against humanity, and that those crimes never must be condemned forever, even though people are 89 years old, 19 years old, or whatever. I think maybe the question is why those discourses now are somehow incorporated by young people. Why, for instance, even in Germany or other places, Hitler stands as a leader. Or Pinochet is regarded as a leader, and people in the US use T-shirts with Pinochet. This crisis of security, this crisis of no utopia, somehow allows this relativization of our past, and somehow from the stance of this human rights organization, the only way maybe is to put historical truths back into the discussion. And then then we have this question about what to do in Chile, at least, and I think in Argentina is the same, what to do with the previous period. Because many people argue, and also Steve Stern has already researched, that people from the right, and not even from the far right, feel they are victims of this previous period. And I think there is a historical discussion we still need to make. And this is the hard thing to do, I think. It's maybe to do this, to make this historical discussion. And regarding Lena's question, she asked if we have found somehow a class privileged relationship in our study. I think we don't. And here in Chile, at least, this far right discourse also reaches poor population, as in US. It's because it's very much connected with the security crisis. We are also facing a lot of poor people, migrants, that they are regarded as people who come here to make crime and whatever. So this is not elitist discourse only. So I don't know if Manuela and Daniela or Nico maybe want to add something.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you, Valentina. It's an honor to share this floor with you, Enrique, for your presentation. I think Lena is a very good question, and it wasn't part of our main research goals, but I have to add two more things to what Carolina just said, what could be important to analyze this aspect of the problem. In Chile, at least, we have an amazing, it's very peculiar for the case of Latin America, we have an amazing internet connection in the sense that it's almost universal. Like almost every Chilean has a smartphone with access to internet. So that also says something about the, who has access to this internet or digital conversation. That's one thing. And the other thing that was not part of this part of the project, but that we were able to see, is that there are two new political parties, and there are many new political organizations, less formal than political parties, that appeals to, they are not made for the elite, okay? So in their DNA of these new political associations, is there like a very popular substratus, I will say. And we think that's very interesting of what is going on right now. And it kind of changed also the type of conversation that these organizations are having, at least in the internet, in the digital sphere. So, yeah. And maybe, well, I have a question also, but probably Enrique, you want to answer Valentina's comments first.
I can, of course, also do that if no one from your group wants to add anything. Then, so the question of method is of course in a work about affect is even broader than how do I represent my interlocutors, because there's of course also the question of how do I assess affect, since I'm not a scientist putting electrodes on people's brains, for example. So a few of the things I did is, well, of course I did interviews, but I also did participant observation. I searched out the spaces in which emotion was to be expected, but I also tried to just notice really in everyday circumstances where mentions of the conflict would appear. So for example, I sometimes tell the story of a knitting workshop in the neighborhood to which I went with my mother-in-law, because all of my interlocutors are relatively closely related to me or people I know, because otherwise those doors would not have opened. So my sample is in no way representative, and it's not huge either, but it's all people who were ready to open their doors and their homes to me. And I think that was one of the necessary conditions really to go about this work. There is, of course, the advantage of me not being a Colombian. So in a lot of moments, I could just, feign surprise at some of the statement I would hear and say, really, that's so interesting. Why would you do that? And that, of course, opened a few more doors, and also often challenged the people to really think about what they've just told me. So some of my interlocutors actually did tell me that they found our interviews quite challenging, in the sense that they had to really reconsider what they were saying, what they were meaning, what they were implying with what we spoke about. But also our relatively close connection made it possible to a degree confront what you called the context of the conflict. So of course I can say, oh, I didn't know that, I'm not from here, and but at the same time I do read the news, and I do know a little bit more about the conflict sometimes than my interlocutors. I did do research, and so sometimes we also had relatively tense discussions about their political positions regarding, for example, voting no in the plebiscite in 2016. sometimes I try to question their willingness to extend empathetic connections to others, question a little the position of what they thought about the world around them. And what I try to do to like really introduce their voices, already in the introduction of the book, I have made like tiny presentations of my interlocutors. So everyone gets a portrait in the beginning to like be in the text as a person. So as a person with a history, with an experience, with an upbringing, and a social position, because I did not want to just have them appear with some brief snippets of a quote. And so, yeah, I tried to give them a little more space than would be normal in a standard academic text, I think. I would leave it there for now for the methodology question. But maybe I do want to say something about doing social sciences in this context. I mean, it's of course challenging, but also, and it's really a commonplace, I'm going to say now, but it's still necessary. And well, I would say I try to use the spaces I have and try to gradually extend them to outside of academia, which in Germany is not too common, really. So we're not big on the third mission yet. And still, I try to like develop my seminars also into project seminars in which we reach out and try to work more with civil society. So this in a Latin American context, that really isn't much to say, but for Germany, it's something. So I try to use those spaces that I have, and also I also think that I mean, there's of course a general cansancio, like everybody's tired because it already feels like we've done so much until here. But I also feel like this doesn't work equally for all of us. So maybe not all of us are tired at the same time. And I'm just hoping that we have enough energy to sometimes, when someone is tired, someone else can stand in. And that's what I'm trying and hoping for. And I also, honestly, from seeing my students, I do have hope for the future generations. I do believe that in the classroom, there's still a lot of young people who do not vote for the right, who are not, who are willing to actually engage. And that's maybe as the last sentence I'm going to say, why I think it's important to also investigate emotions, because I really believe that this forging of a connection is more important than ever. And it's that connection also with people we may politically not be too common with which kind of relates to what I did in my book. We need those connections, and we need to connect also with people we have some reservations with. And I'm not saying with everyone, like I'm not saying the ultra extreme, like some cases are difficult if not lost. But everybody in between that, I think we should still try.
Someone want to say something? I have a question. I don't know which one, who formulate this question. The name, I can see the name, but the question is to Rike, and is: do you see the concept of empathy playing a role in process of paz total promoted by President Petro's government, or at least in helping to reduce the rising wave of conflict currently affecting Colombia? Jonathan Romero is the question. Okay.
Thank you,
Can you hear?
Jonathan.
Yeah?
Yes. Thank you, Jonathan, for the question. Well, I think the first thing to always say about Paz Total is the very, very unfortunate name. Like for a German, it's impossible to not think of the total war when I hear total peace, and I just don't think that's the connection. It just doesn't work for me. But do I see empathy in Paz Total? Honestly, I don't feel too comfortable about answering about those current politics. No, I feel really hard pressed to. I mean, obviously it's an idea, but I'm not sure about extending the idea of empathy to institutions. I do think something happens there that is not as easily translatable as when we're talking about empathy between people, when we're trying to move the concept towards institutions. And obviously, when we're talking Paz Total, we're talking public policy, and that is kind of a different. So it might have the intention, but I'm not sure about the translation into actual politics.
Okay. We have other question from Catherine Briggs. I will read. In The Open Society and Its Enemy by Karl Popper, he presents the paradox of tolerance, suggesting that if a society extends tolerance to those who are intolerant, the risk is the eventual dominance of intolerance, which undermines the whole idea of tolerance as a whole. John Rawls, on the principal writer of the liberal democracy, says that rejecting intolerance should only be invoked in a just society when there is a concrete threat to freedom and stability. One of these ideological political arguments about control of the narrative of human rights as it seems to be manifesting itself on social media, manifesting this paradox. If so, what should you consider to be the threshold at which we find ourselves under the threats that Rawls suggests? More concretely, what is our responsibility in the field to intervene in these political processes? Oh my God.
Wow, this is a big question. No, very interesting. Thank you very much, Catherine, for going deep. I think there is no right answer, like straightforward answer, obviously, and because when and who there is also the question of who is the actor or the sector of society that can say now we reached this threshold, or now we are really our democracy is really challenged. Bolsonaro, for instance, and Milei have been democratically elected, so we are not in a dictatorship here. So and free speech and all this. I think we must assume now that we are in a battle and we need to struggle. And at least in Chile, as far as I understand, scholars, we are involved in this struggle. We have a political and ethical point of view. We are not this neutral scholar living in the university only. But this is a very, very narrow answer. I don't have really a deeper answer, but I really appreciate your question. I don't know if Manuela, Daniela, Enrique, maybe obviously, and Nico want to say something about this.
I don't have the answer, but I would like to tell Catherine that I liked a lot her framing of the problem. I think that we are seeing or in front of a lot of paradoxes. It's like the paradox of memory, the limits of memory politics, the limits of the victim as a space for social solidarity. And also now we are facing the limits and the problems of human rights as a safe place. So I think that first what we are doing is trying to understand. In our case, we are also trying to understand what is new in this new process of negationism, how to pronounce, regarding the recent history. And in our discussions, what it seems important is this debate on the basis that has to do with what are human rights and who is the us in human rights. And what it seems to be a path to follow is that it seems necessary to rethink how to assess what is human rights. It's what I mean is to find a new intellectual agreement or an ethical framework to reassess what is human rights. I think that that is relevant in this moment.
Yeah, perhaps also just to comment a little bit the questions of Catherine, and also connected a bit with one of the questions that Valentina said, that maybe this also like it made me think about the issue of regulation of social media, right? Like one of like what you were saying, like the tension between regulating social media and they put it like ideological struggle or cultural struggle, depending on how you want to frame it. I think that yeah, like the whole issue is, I think that in these like post-dictatorial societies, like the whole issue of how do we define, like, for example, what you were saying, like a just society, a democratic society, a tolerant society, etc., is what it's now being put like, well, not only now, but it has always been a tension, right? For example, I don't know, like if we think about the idea of salvationist memory, this is something that is kind of old. It's been around for at least 20 years at least, or more, right? The thing is that now that discourse of salvationist memory is so like amplified in social media that it becomes kind of like a normalized discourse, or like a discourse that is like publicly available like for everyone. Maybe it's not a niche discourse or a discourse that it's like restricted to a very small like social circle. So I think that the question of regulation, tolerance, and intolerance, it is by no means any answer to the question. It's just like to keep like adding some ideas to it. Is, I feel like, not it is not a straightforward answer to the problem, because in the end the terms that we're discussing of tolerance, democracy, just society, etc., is what is being at dispute, I think, at all times now. With social media, those disputes are much more amplified, right? But even without social media, those disputes had already been there for decades. And so, yeah, I think that in the end, as you were saying, like, what is our responsibility in this whole struggle as academics or citizens or whatever you wanna frame that? I think it has to do with perhaps something that Enrique was saying, like when you feel like perhaps implicated or interpellated by these discourses, it's like, I think that in the end the answer of what you have to do, or what not you have to, but what you do is like perhaps like present these conflicts, present this issue as like, as ideological issues of, political issues. It's not like, again, I don't think there is like a straightforward answer to the issue or to the problem. It's just like, I don't know, like facilitate dialogues, maybe kind of like what Enrique was saying. I don't know, it's very hard to say, but I think it's a very interesting question to keep like thinking forward.
Thank you. Yeah. I just wanted to add something. I mean, thank you so much, Catherine, for your kind of difficult question. And I will say that, I mean, I will transform your question into a research question, in the sense that even for us, like, when do we have to, like, raise our alarms and like be or maybe change between towards a much more normative approach, like try to identify which are those critical junctures in which the liberal approach doesn't work anymore, like, and that is connected to my comment/question. It's not for a particular presenter. Maybe it's also for Valentina and for colleagues that are working in different contexts. And it's about translation of this frame that we are using, like when we see, or where are, maybe in this way, what are the conditions to translate a discursive phenomenon into a much more practical and concrete phenomenon, And I think probably the case of Argentina right now is very graphic in that sense. But it's a question that I'm asking myself, like, when do we have to be really, really concerned? Like, because as Nico was saying, and it's part of the frame of this project, right? Like, internet digital discourse is sometimes very difficult to grasp and to kind of delimitate. So I think that maybe that change in the direction of the question of Katerina can help us to keep this reflection going, which is very, very difficult. But yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Thank you. Les agradezco a todos.
Okay. So I want to say something very little to Katerina. A paradox is a paradox, and I mean, it's two forces fighting together. And as Daniela said, human rights is not out as a metaphysical position out of this fight. I mean, our challenge is to study, to know how historically, sociologically, in a particular society, human rights function as a part of this conflict. So because of that, we are in the middle of the river. I mean, we're in the middle of the river, looking forward, a past, going back, and looking the future, like a dystopic imagine. So, I mean, this is my positive position. So,
Gracias.
Alexander, do you want to say something? Okay. Yeah? Talk if you want.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for some very interesting presentations. I really enjoyed it. So I have two questions, one for each presentation. So if I start with the COES team, I was wondering where does the grassroots actors play in? Like, what kind of results did you get from the grassroots level? Because you mentioned a couple of politicians and Congress members, and I was wondering if you also found some results on the bottom up perspective, because I think in terms of comparing it with the memory dynamic of the estallido social in Chile, where it was a very much a bottom-up kind of memory process, right, without much participation from official actors, from parliament members and such. I was wondering if you've seen if there's a difference with this kind of far right memory discourses in Chile, if they are more top down, or that was just something I was wondering. And then my question to Rike would be if you could maybe elaborate a little bit about your own implicatedness. I really like that idea of putting yourself into the research and also applying the implicated subject on yourself as a researcher. So I would love to hear more about that. Thank you.
So,
Okay, thank you very much, Alexander, for your question. Yeah, of course, we presented like posts from political figures. Yeah, one interesting thing we found, and this relates to what Valentina and Catherine also have asked, is that not everybody at the end use social media. Because we also complemented the study with some interviews of far-right activists and people who also got in the last election. And we found that a very important process is going on in Chilean society of people from Protestant churches. Those are very based group. You know that the Protestant churches don't have any hierarchical structure, and in Chile, the ultra-conservative discourse have penetrated or is used or promoted by those churches. And Chile is still a very much Catholic society, but we are somehow moving into a Protestant or evangelic. In Chile, they are called evangelicos. And those church-based groups, which are very much grassroots, don't use much social media, and they promote these very ultra-conservative ideas, and they promote against abortion, for instance, and the rights of people to have diverse sexual identities and whatever. And so we haven't found much of this in social media because they don't use them. They are church-based. And then, well, there are other grassroots movements and groups that do use social media, and I will ask Nico to answer this part.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the question, Alex. Nice to see you, by the way. I think that thinking of the question, I can think of some examples really like that comes to mind. Like, for example, there was this one post from, for example, Fundación Nuevamente, which is called New Mind Foundation, which is, I mean, it is interesting because it is associated with someone that has lots of presence in Chilean politics, like Teresa Marinovich, who is, you know, even though she's not like formally like a parliamentarian currently, right? But she's always been involved, and she has like she has power in the end in terms of when she presents something, like people listen to her, and she's like somehow legitimized as a figure of knowledge from the far right in Chile. And Fundación Nuevamente, New Mind Foundation, is like constantly producing materials, for example, not only posts, like not only in social media, but also like materials on their website of, for example, when the constitutional process, the constitutional convention was going on, right? They started publishing lots of stuff on like, what are your rights, or what are your, you know, kind of like, what is the debate, what is like what the left wants to do, like, and kind of like present this in a very like conspiranoic way. So I think that's a good example. The other example that I can think of are the Kaiser brothers, Kaiser siblings, actually, like Vanessa Kaiser, Axel Kaiser, well, Johannes Kaiser, sorry, but Johannes Kaiser is like a parliamentarian, but Axel and Vanessa Kaiser are more like intellectuals, influencers, kind of like making lots of content on social media, which also has lots of influence in the end. And it's also like not, even though they are not formally politicians, but they do, especially when they post something on social media, they generate so many interactions on the comment sections, and they generate so many, like, I don't know what's the word, arrastre. They pull so much, as a huge audience in the end. And that kind of like creates this sense of what of like, yeah, like not necessarily like a formal organization. So it's not like an like top down, but it's kind of like, I don't know, in between. Like in the end, what I'm thinking is that the far right grassroots organizations that we see on social media or with these examples are also like articulated with, in the end, with, well, economic capital, cultural capital, political capital in the end. So it's like in between of top down, bottom up. Of course, there are other grassroots organizations like APRA, like kind of like associated with peace in Araucania, like anti-terrorist, anti-indigenous people, etc., which are also like present there in social media that also generate lots of pull from audiences. And in terms of the content, it may not be as different, as some of the posts that we showed before with Carolina. But yeah, they are there and they do produce content and they do produce like lots of interactions, which is in the end what really like struck us when doing the research. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Alexander. Nice to see you. My own implication is probably also in a lot of ways, a methodology question. For one, because I would say like every encounter with my interlocutors really is also an effective engagement. There was never a way of doing this without being implicated in that study, because most of my interlocutors do not talk about the conflict. They had to because I asked. And so this circumstance in and of itself had to be made visible in the text. And so there was never an option for me not to be there. That would have been a very weird text. And also, interestingly, what could have been my implication in the text never really came up, because to a degree, I would say my interlocutors are not that well politically informed, to say it diplomatically, in the sense that they could have always challenged me as the German for German involvement in coal mining in areas of displacement, for example. They could have challenged topic we love to talk about with Hannah, for example, the idea that Germany has worked through its past so well that we're now the experts in the global south to tell others how it's done. And those ideas could have been challenged, but my interlocutors would have had to know a lot about Germany, which they didn't. And so these kinds of dynamics don't really play out in the book, even though they could have, and with a different audience most likely would have also. But in that sense, my implication in the book is really reduced to my presence as an intruder, as an outsider, that triggered very often the effective engagements and the engagement with the conflict, because without me, they could have not thought about it.
Thank you.
Okay. Some other question, maybe? No? Okay. Caro, Daniela, what do you think about doing social sciences in this context? They want to say something, Manuela, Nicolás?
I think this is the nice part of doing social media research and not interviewing. No, really, it's very hard. It's very hard to do those kind of interviews when you really, when people say things that you really don't agree with. It's not easy. So, well, it's an answer. But I think it's the thing we need to do now. We as scholars of human rights and memory, I think this is one of the topics we need to research now. This is what I feel, at least. I don't know, Daniela, Manuela, please.
Yeah, I have a sort of methodological note from the experience of working in this project, which I think could be something that we can discuss here, which is also the problem of doing research with social media in this time, right? And this is something that we didn't see in a clear way when we started, but it was real. I mean, a real problem in our way, in the sense that all the access that at that time you can take for granted. The other day or next week is going to change, and that's something really. I mean, doing research is always like that, but I guess in this particular context is much more quick. I mean, the changes that we have seen are really impressive, and I think that's a sort of lesson that at least I take for my future projects, in the sense that you have to be really careful in the sense of not, for example, rely completely on that type of source, because you don't know. I mean, the next week probably that particular platform will close the API, and you won't be able to see any of these contents. Plus, of course, the ethical, layer of this conversation, which is also very, very important for us. I mean, what is the limit between, the public and the public? I mean, the public and the private space when you are searching for, far-right accounts in any type of platform. So I think those two things, I would say that for us have been important and has been a kind of a huge challenge that we didn't see in that way at the beginning. And I think is something for us. I mean, for probably many of you, something that we have to discuss and we have to be aware of.
Thank you, Manuela. Very interesting. Very, very interesting question. Okay. So we have to say goodbye. Yeah or not? Okay. So for me, it was very interesting exchange. I'm very glad. Thank you very much, Manuela, Carolina, Enrique, Nicolás, Daniela, and Katarzyna from Sarajevo, I think. I hope that we manage another kind of meeting to continue this exchange, and it's very important to be together to share, no? To share our advances, our questions, our challenges and difficulties, especially difficulties to produce, no, social knowledge. So thank you very much. If someone wants to say something or just goodbye, I don't know.
No,
Okay.
I would also like to thank you very much, Valentina, also Katarina, and all the colleagues that attended the meeting and all your questions. So I hopefully we meet each other, some of us in Prague, and if not, in another internet meeting. Thank you very, very much.
And thank you to Memory Study Association for providing
Of course.
the supports. Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.